Welcome to Season 3 of the Knack for Business podcast. Over 200 episodes strong, we're here to ignite your entrepreneurial spirit with fresh insights, networking gems, and creative strategies that elevate your game. Ready to discover what your knack for business truly is.
Today's topic is orchestrating emerging talent ecosystems, empowering dreams and tomorrow's leaders. Your hosts are Bernie Francois from Creative Insight and Wayne Pratt from Motivate You Inc. So, what can you expect from the Knack for Business podcast? We aims to help you find your feet in the business world. Our guest today is Brien Convery. Brien is a TEDx speaker, Chief Emerging Talent Officer at Emerge Talent, and founder and host of the Coffee with Convery podcast. As a multi-award winning talent executive, Brien is shaking up the emerging talent landscape by building vibrant ecosystems that connect students, employers, and educators. As a passionate youth advocate and founder of Dudes, the Dine for Men's Mental Health in Toronto, Brien brings people together with his infectious energy and love for meaningful connections. His insights on talent, recruitment, workforce transformation, diversity, and leadership have been featured on campuses across North America, 640 AM Toronto Radio, and in top publications like American Banker, Financial Pipeline, and Dell Technologies. With a fresh perspective and a knack for inspiring change, Brien is dedicated to shaping a future where talent thrives and communities prosper. Brien, welcome. How are you, sir?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me on the show. Excited.
Sir, what's your favorite quote or saying?
You know what? I don't know if I assume some of your listeners might know Charles Schultz, the inventor of the Peanuts comic strip and all those wonderful holiday shows we see. But I had an opportunity to visit his office that's set up in his museum in California. But one of the most, and I think he's a wonderful person who has lots of great quotes, but one of the ones that really sits with me and hits home is the one that says, "Be yourself. No one else can say you're doing it wrong," by Charles Schultz.
Oddly enough, my wife uses the Peanuts allegories every once in a while.
Yeah.
And there are teammates that they look blankly back, either too young or not from Canada originally. And they go, what's that all mean? And that's a little bit of a surprise. So what's your tagline for your business?
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you for sharing. Convery and Company is the company, but it has a number of different assets and lines of business, if you will. And Emerge Talent is really the one we're here to talk about today, which is we're just not adapting to the changing world of work, we're shaping it.
So what got you into this space? How did you drive down this lane and going, emerging talent? Here's my cue. Here's my start point.
Yeah, to be honest, I think I've always had a knack for coaching, mentoring, and supporting others. And when I had amazing leaders that took time to spend time with me in my career, gave me opportunities, hired me for my potential, it really set me on a course and a path that really was able to do what I dreamed of doing and was able to do it. And so having spent my career in what I call really off-roading experience of multiple disciplines and different industries and sectors, I found my real meaning and my purpose working with the younger generation. And I had the opportunity to dive deeper into that the last 12 plus years, where I've been supporting campus recruitment for some of the big Fortune 500 companies globally, and really looking at that student experience, the barriers they face to employment, and also just really thinking that they need a voice and someone that's here to help them think about what's next. Diving into that, I worked for that for a few years. I also became the executive in residence for University of Toronto in the higher ed space. I'm working right now at the University of Windsor, helping them with some of their student activities. But overall, it really has been a passion of mine to just really get behind the youth because they're the architects of our future. And we really need to support them in understanding what's next and how they can go about it. Honestly, I think sometimes you need an adult in the room that knows the landscape and can navigate it, and hopefully bring some wisdom but fun along the way.
As the old man in the room, I can't let this interview pass without using the word whippersnapper.
Yeah, yeah, that's true.
I'm interested in generations merge a little, and there are buffers on both ends as a rule. But Gen Z is clearly a different community, especially one that the boomers, I would say, don't get yet. Why don't you tell me more about them, what you think they bring to the table?
Yeah, Wayne, great conversation and great question. Each generation comes with their own lived experiences. We are products of our own generation as well. And I think what tends to happen, and we've seen it, I know the generation before me had preconceived concepts and ideas of maybe what we were capable of. We like to generalize and put people in a box and label things. And I think one of the biggest things I've learned to do in exploring and promoting the youth is to listen to them, to go out for coffee, to understand their generation, what they're living, what they've lived. And I think with the Gen Z or Gen Z, depending if you're in the US or Canada listening to this, they're really a powerful generation that needs to have some demystification of who they are because many think they don't want to work. They've grown up on digital. They've done this, they've done that, but they bring fresh perspectives and digital fluency to the careers and to us. And from my perspective, I really think that with the right tools, guidance, and support systems to help them thrive, they could really bring a different conversation to the workplace. And workplace offices, construction sites, it doesn't matter where that takes place. I think, but having that opportunity to just give them a voice and understand what they see could really help us in understanding the future and what they might bring to the table.
And I know each generation looks at things differently. Is it because the previous generation they're looking to be fact of try to be different, or is it also a fact that be different and the space has changed? If you spin back 200 years, right, there's
Yeah.
probably a cycle of change always that's happening. The avant garde, the mere fact that you have that means status quo won't hold true. Is it for the Gen Zs then? What defines them best is their how they perceive their environment, and then what drove them into that space, and not I shouldn't say drove, but maybe what guided them into that path.
You nailed it with the idea that we each grew up in an ecosystem or an environment, right? That's different from the generation before. I think with what I've seen in my research, talking to young people and Gen Z, and just being out there and understanding some of the challenges and listening to what they're facing, a lot of the Gen Z, if we think about the age group and what they've experienced, they've grown up in a world of COVID. They attended schools in high school, university, and college, and maybe even their first job online or internship online. That that creates a whole other level of something we don't even know how that's going to transpire over the years, right? I think the ability to communicate, and I tell young people, communication and doing all that online, you've gained a skill that I have no idea how I would have dealt with that had I been in that situation. Hopefully, they can add that skill to help us all understand different ways of communication, different ways of being available. And then, as far as the environment, if you think about this generation, many of them have told me they've experienced life at home where their parents have lost their jobs, were laid off, had mental challenges and issues as it related to navigating the workspace, maybe at an older age with no job. And they've seen that and that idea of security, as we used to put it, for working for companies and organizations. And they've seen that be disrupted. They've seen their parents lose their job after 25 years. And we know that there's business reasons. We know that's the economy. We know there's different things. But what they felt on a personal level is they've seen their parents in probably their worst states of dealing with some of this. And they don't want that to continue. They want to have the freedom to express themselves, to share their thoughts, to have mental wellness at work, to be supported. And also, I think it's also changing the whole idea of work itself. I know a lot of them are thinking about gig work, working for a couple different companies, not putting all my eggs in one basket, not wanting to maybe work for one company and fear the lack of losing a job. You can't have that fear and think that all the time, but the world they've grown up in is they've seen things that we haven't seen or experienced. I myself had a dad who worked for the same company for 35 years and we never thought anything about it, right? So I think they have a different perspective and fresh ideas, and they're also speaking up about it where maybe previous generations thought they couldn't or they wouldn't. But I think that listening to them, these are some of the things I hear.
If you started your employment in the 80s, you were given a business card and a binder and thrown in the deep end. And some survived and some didn't. I'm guessing that you seen support systems and structure that makes that journey more profitable. Can you tell me about those tools?
Yeah, Wayne, thank you for that question. You're right. I was in that boat with binder and thrown into the deep end for sure. And I think the thing that I've seen is the programming and the structures that schools, post-secondary institutions, some of even the career colleges and construction organizations are putting together apprenticeship programs and different things to really support this generation. And it's encouraging. It's encouraging because it provides a framework where people can thrive and understand their skills and really learn. I think that the programming side can also be too overemphasized. So the flip side of that is there's so much programming, which I have seen in organizations I worked for, where they get to the end of a 2-year rotational program with an organization and you're done. You're thrown into the whole environment of that organization and you're looking around for that support. Now you're going to get support from your managers and leaders and things like that, but there's two sides of that coin on the programming side and how much we do and support. But in most cases, where I've seen the support there, the systems in place, the frameworks at the schools, or the frameworks at a student experience that I built at one of my clients I worked for, it allows the students to explore and to think differently about what they might be wanting to do. So I think in all the senses of a program and that support system, it's helpful. Networking is a big part of that too. Networking is a big part. It also is challenging depending on where you come from. I've met a lot of immigrant students who they got their jobs by having great grades. What do you mean I got to talk to someone? So it's a different world. And I always try to frame networking as more of connecting and really making relationships work. And when you try to humanize that, that support system of a network can really help as we've all benefited in our careers.
One thing that I see or have seen, even like in the last 1,000 years, is every generation has opinions about the next generation. In the push and push back, what do you think is going to be not only accepted but absorbed by the generation before them as they were right? What do you think?
Yeah, this is a tricky one. I think we're in the first time that we have 4 generations working together in the workplace. So that is a whole nother dynamic. Just the way they approach conversations across the board. And I've seen some cool cartoons and different things depicting how what they heard and what they heard. But I think that being open-minded is the biggest thing first, to be open-minded to those in the room and understand who's at the table. We talk about emotional intelligence, and we've talked about that. I know you've covered that on your podcast here. The other one that's really coming to the forefront now is cultural intelligence, and that's really understanding all the different places we come from in this journey of work and life. And so when we have that opportunity to learn from each other and not to draw out our own biases without really checking in on what they're saying and why they're saying what they're saying and asking questions. I don't think we get it. I think the first thing really is just about welcoming in the different minds and the different ideas because innovation comes from that. We continue to do things the way we've done. We know what happens. We've seen the blockbusters of the world and other people who didn't change the way they were doing things to be successful in their organizations or their organization. But as individuals, I really feel I've had a lot of young people reach out and say they're hitting a wall. People don't want to hear their ideas. And I try to give them different ways to break through. But I think we also owe them that because I don't know about you, but when you thrived with a leader who gave you responsibility and believed in you, how did you feel?
You mentioned something that was really interesting. Four generations are overlapping on top of in the workspace. Are you indicating then in previous cycles, and I'll put it in the term of cycles, an age group coming through, etc. Whether you're a tradesman or a white collar person or a legal or physician in that strata versus I don't know, I don't want to say robber baron, but you're owning the company. It's mega, right? It's we're going to space, boys. Put on your boots. Are you saying in the past years those cycles were a little more spread out, and then what's happening now? And I'm trying to get a frame of reference. There's two
Yeah,
parts to this question. One is, what is the age group of the Gen Z right now? Are they like 20 to 30, 20 to 25? Right.
yeah.
And the other part is, are these cycles now becoming more on top of each other? Because they too themselves will have to look out for the next gen that comes down pipe, or two gens coming down. So is it technology? I'll stop talking now.
No, these are great points, Bernie. So if I look at it two ways, so first of all, when we look at the four generations, I've actually heard people say five, and I've looked at it myself. I think five's pushing it, depending on if people are still in the workforce at that age, but at the farther end. But if you look at the Industrial Revolution going all the way back, people just didn't live as long as we're living and spending as much time as work as we're spending. So just by the nature of the human being and the lifespan and what's going on, we're starting younger because internships, I've hired high school students to come work at an organization in the summer. And so going down to that level, right? And then if people are staying longer, that is unique to now. Yes, there was overlap in the past, but not as much overlap because people were look forward to that retirement early. Now people are not retiring, they're staying on longer, they're coming back as a consultant. So that span of age groups is definitely at its peak now. And if you look at the different generations, and I wish I had all the dates of who's and what here, but I know that Gen Z is down into the 15 years up to the 25-ish range. If I have to look at the years of when they were born, I think 2000 and past was the ages, and they overlap with the millennials. And the millennials and the Gen Zs are actually very different. I've talked to millennials, and they don't even understand the Gen Zs. And I'm like, hey, they're your peers almost, but they're very different in the way they think. Digital natives completely, right? Totally grew up on digital. A little bit different in sort of their outlooks also on work and life. Millennials are a little bit more different in the way they approach the work. And so it's an interesting contrast and comparison.
What is the ease, if you will? What is the positivity of the older manager, possibly an older company, having the mindset to work with the Gen Zs, and how much is he stymied before he even starts? And I say he because that sexism was there. Tell me about how they're doing coping.
The older generation?
Yes.
Yeah. So I'm very proud of where I am in this space because I feel not enough people have stayed in this sort of early emerging talent. They use it as a stepping stone to get to other things. And I've stayed here for the very reason that you're articulating also, because there's a lot I've learned that I've shared upward as well as back and forth. And a recent story I heard from a young man was he went into he's always loved cars, always worked in cars. As a kid, went to the school, knows a boatload around electric cars and studied all these automotive technologies, was hired by a car company, one of these, as you put it, like an older company that's been around, and with a bunch of older leaders. And he was hired for his expertise. But what he shared with me was within a first week or first month of being there, he was starting to be shut out of meetings and told that we're not making those changes. We're going to do what we've always done. And it's interesting because a lot of people say that person's burnt out or they're burned out or this one's burnt out. Actually, it's demoralized because he really wants to share his ideas and thoughts. And he thought that's why he was hired with all this background and love for cars and love for a passion. And let's be honest, if he's gone through all this education on electric cars and different things to do and batteries and all these plants popping up, we should be embracing that talent, not shoving them in a corner and but not inviting them to the meetings any longer. So I think my advice to some of these people is to really think twice because someone else will hire him and they'll surpass you if you don't start to change and listen to some of the younger ones that have gone through this education or even have the passion. Just think of that. I told him, I'm like, collect that paycheck, but you're probably not going to change that whole group of what he called white hair men. You're going to have to do something. And you may not find this is the place for you, and that's okay too. But unfortunately, those stories continue, and we really need to almost pass the baton to the younger generation so we all can enjoy our lives as well.
One thing with your background in universities, you might have a really neat take on the culture between the sort of greater Asian community and the South Asian community and the European community and the North American community. Do you find that there are overlaps? Are there big differences? Or is there more fluidity? What's your take on the culture of the Gen Zs?
Great
Yeah.
question, Wayne. Great question. I think that's probably one of the biggest challenges is the globalization of this generation. So there's so many young people coming from lived experiences, cultures, and backgrounds, and hard to sometimes not. We know we have unconscious biases. We know that sometimes we think we know, but I've seen that be a challenge even amongst the group, right? Because there's domestic students, international students, they're all coming together. Like I said earlier with networking, a lot of Pan-Asian, Asian countries, they don't necessarily, they get jobs by having great grades and getting the jobs and they get hired through that. They don't go networking, they don't do this. They don't. So when they come to US or Canada and they face this, it's a different world. So I think you can't ignore that. That's a big part of it. But again, I think if we all listen to each other's cultural differences and norms and embrace some of those different ways of thinking, I think it just brings new ideas to the table.
Would it be fair to say that, again, if you're taking a Gen Z perspective on an approach to something, we're basing it right now in the North American culture. And if you go overseas, you go to Japan, for example, they'll have certain decorum or a protocol or process, and it's showing signs of respect. Even here in Canada, if you go to an Indigenous community, I was made aware of you're going to approach this community, you're going to talk to the elders. These are the steps, right? And not that what you're proposing isn't cutting edge, but there's a process flow to each approach to
Mhm.
each group or agency that you might be talking to. Do you help prepare the Gen Zs then to listen? You got the magic. You're probably going to have a lot more juice with these guys or gals,
Mhm. Mhm.
but this is how you go in. You go to a frat party. And someone goes, "Yo, what's up?" And
Yeah.
I'm probably already dating how old that phrasing is. It's not the same thing as "good evening" or "good evening, sir."
Yeah. A big part of any sort of talent strategy or anything you're looking at for engagement and attraction and retention of staff, you really need to have a focus on the what we know. I think more we talk now about equity, diversity, and inclusion as one thing because they all go hand in hand. And I think my experience of having led a inclusive recruitment team for one of the major banks too, it was an eye-opening experience, and I learned quite a bit about other types of communities and other types of indigenous folks and different things. And to your point, Bernie, you can't approach it all in the same way. I think this is a really tricky one because I think a lot of organizations try to have that equal balance of representation, and sometimes, however, the work or the way the work's defined or the way that the organization is operating doesn't suit that individual or their cultural values or norms. And so I think we have to recognize that because there's cases where you can do listening sessions, which I've been a part of. You can learn, you can do more. But at the end of the day, too, I think that it's also allowing individuals to choose and to explore the cultural aspects of these organizations, but also allowing people to express who they are in the workplace is important. I've seen a lot of changes you all have seen too, probably over the years of all the different things that have changed. We're not all the way there, but we need to continue down that path because this expression I used to hear, bring your authentic self to work, especially that was something that was used in the LGBTQ plus community. I said, okay, why don't you put in the words women, bring your authentic self to work, or why don't you put in the words other types of, and would you actually say that? Of course, you're going to bring your authentic self to work if you're a woman or if you're, but an indigenous person too, right? Bring your authentic self to work. So I think we need to not worry about bringing it. I think we need to worry about creating the space, the safe space for people to be who they are. And probably one of the biggest lessons I've learned, and just some of the ways people have approached topics with me, and flipping the narrative and seeing what they think. If you substitute in another group, does it really fly? Everyone should be able to be safe at work, regardless of who you are and what you believe and what you do.
You just mentioned something really interesting. There's another group. We meet every Thursday for 6 weeks, and it's a 2 hour session. And the guy's name is Dr. Keith Dietz. And he says, listen, it's a mastermind on leadership.
Mhm.
And he says two things. A, it's a safe place. Two, you can have a divergent opinion. You have, so when you said the safe place, you have a condensation of constructs that comes out of it. Probably a very aloof way of saying it. Basically, things will come out in the wash that are, hey, you know what? Two different divergent points of view. You agree on some things, and you have an outcome that, yeah, it's a winning scenario. So I found that was really interesting, having that safe space.
Yeah, 100%. And I think to your point about decision making and conversations, like, it's also healthy to agree to disagree, right? You're not going to agree with everything on everything with someone. That's just, and if you are, I would challenge going out of the room. Are you still agreeing? That's none of us are going to agree on every single thing. But
Or the fact that it is Sunday, and yes, it is Sunday. Yes, I agree with that. Unless, of course, you're in Australia, in which case you're
yeah,
Monday.
there you go. Yeah.
Brian, the point you made earlier I thought was quite interesting is the Z's were basically educated in the pandemic. And in the pandemic, we got hyper aware of mental health.
hmm
And some of that seems to have gone from the urgent to the more thoughtful. And some may have disappeared totally. What is your take on what was left from mental health awareness post pandemic?
It's a great question. I feel we're still living the repercussions of the pandemic, and I don't know if we yet know what that's going to be on the way we approach things and mental health, whatever. Look how it's impacted the return to work policies, conversations, and all those things, which is a whole nother podcast. But it's really interesting to see how individuals are coming out and coming through that. I'm a big fan of what we're doing here, engagement and talking and getting together in person as well. It is difficult in some cases for the younger generation, where they now are being thrown into the workplace and now trying to figure out, how do you navigate that conversation? And I've heard things such as, they might be in the room next to me and they're texting me the questions. And I just say, come in here, right? Come in and talk to me. But it's truly how they had to communicate and get a hold of people, and how they were raised. So I think, as far as the mental wellness part and other things, I think there's more to be seen. I feel that, I don't know, I think having different generations in the workplace is actually an interesting model for that. I think you can learn a lot. I have learned over my career from those that came before me, those behind me, and those that are with me. And if you can have that opportunity to collaborate, talk, and learn new ideas, I think it's great.
For employers. Right now, we've talked about the Gen
Yeah.
Z, right? And hi, guys, you're about to go walk into this workplace, and this is their kind of frame of reference, so forth. Flipping the coin around in the wall, how do you prepare them to go, listen, what you used to do isn't going to hold true anymore, just by pure evolution of technology, by pure evolution of the Gen Z populations coming in behind, and your previous clients were aren't the same, aren't going to be the same type, right? You got to adapt and
Yeah.
adjust, right? How do you
Right.
prepare them? That's a big shift.
Oh, it's huge. It's a huge shift. And it's also goes back to some of the points around the way we do the work. And I think there's two things that come in this. One, when I was working for a construction company, and we were looking at the fact that we were introducing iPads into the estimation process out in the construction fields. The previous generation, they didn't use an iPad. They use what they use as far as tools and techniques to do estimations of different things. Now, the younger generation coming in is, I'll jump on it, and they're all over it and they're figuring it out. There's ways to embrace that in different ways because you can also share your wisdom with them. They can actually show you how to use something. And if you collaborate, you can see the differences, but also the opportunities. The other thing I think to prepare the organizations, the businesses and all those things, I think it relates. I pare it down to the people in the organization. So one of the things I found great success in is these hiring managers. We all assume hiring managers or the supervisor know how to manage and lead a student. And it's very different than your experienced hire or someone who has a breadth and depth of experience. This generation, they're looking for coaching and mentoring, learning opportunities. They're obviously coming in with lived experiences, schooling, education, but they're just starting out. Again, back to hiring for potential. But I've run some pretty fantastic conversations with hiring managers around how to think differently in this space. One really simple one, this is really simple, but I remember where we bring a lot of organizations hire in the summer. Let's be honest. They bring in students in from left, right, and center. And I remember a student coming to me and saying, my manager is going on vacation for 5 weeks. He said, I'm reporting to the other student. No, you're not. That is not the way to manage the situation. But the forward thinking of, oh, it's summer, I'm bringing in a student. I might want to set up a support structure when I'm out for vacation for a couple of weeks because we know people are going to be on vacation. But I think it's just understanding that individual needs a little bit more nurturing than just they're gone, right? So my biggest thing is the organizations need to empower their people. They need to empower the hiring managers and supervisors and give them some education around what's new with this generation, what's going on, what type of work they might be doing. Thinking through, maybe you have to have maybe an hour or two set up a day to have some office hours where they can pop in with questions, whatever it is that works. But I think boiling it down to actually the people in these companies and these organizations. I know when I was a new manager, I didn't know how to manage younger. You learn, but for that real leadership to come through, you really need some support yourself.
You mentioned authenticity. Have you ever heard about during a hiring process where you're meeting the Gen Z person and they're very Gen Z, and you go, I think you'll do really well here after I die. But until then, maybe you should work somewhere else. Have you actually heard anyone be that bold-faced?
I don't know if I've heard that, although I'm not in the rooms when they have these conversations, which also scares me sometimes, right? What are we saying in these interviews? Hopefully being authentic and also being supportive. But I think there is a bit of that wing going on. I think the connection to people is always a challenge, right? When you live different ways or different ideas or thoughts. I have found, for whatever reason, that the reason I stay in this space and help companies and students and schools in that ecosystem of connecting it all is, for whatever reason, I can navigate the conversations, and young people are not afraid to talk to me or tell me things. And the C-suite isn't either. And I think that's just the way I approach it is, if you think to be that person in that interview and just really be yourself and be okay to expose your vulnerability to the new person in the room, you can actually gain a lot of trust and a lot of support and a lot of understanding. I think sometimes it's our own fears, the next, more than it is just being open to that.
You work through several industries, and I'm interested on what industry has had the biggest pushback that you've seen and who has come at it the most naturally. I think it would be quite different.
Yeah, I have had that's where I get my learning. I've always done this role for the last few years in different industries, and the reason is because you can take cross-sector ideas and maybe infiltrate new ideas and thoughts. As far as the ones, I think there's a lot of the new fintechs, a lot of the new startups, a lot of what you would imagine. Healthcare is taking a different angle on things. There's a lot of things happening, and I think what I encourage job seekers to do too is look at the job market data of where stuff is growing. Because even if you're in tech, which we know there's been lots of layoffs across North America, people in tech and young students are struggling to get that entry-level job. Tech in a sector that's growing, they need tech. If you look at that, I think it's really important to stay in tune with the job market, But I have seen some industries and sectors who are slow to, let's say, change. And I've worked in situations where it was supposed to be a transformational change and it ended up being a transactional change, which I'm definitely not the right guy for that because after I figure that out, I'm out. But I think it's being open to that transformational thoughts and for industries and sectors that are even combining efforts, right? You're seeing a lot of cool things happening. One of the ones that really gets me going is construction and industrial. We need infrastructure. Let's be honest. Look at the news. Every time you turn on the news, there's something on fire, blowing up, landslides, whatever it is. Those fields have some pretty cool offerings, and some of the people I'm talking in those fields are setting up apprenticeships that would like blow your mind. It's really cool stuff going on, and that whole mindset of success. And I think sometimes people don't always think that type of sector and industry, it's too dirty, it's not for me, it's whatever it is. There's some really interesting opportunities, and shout out to those folks that are also like trying to drive more young people into that field.
You find that for economic growth for a company, or even not status quo, but sustaining their business, keeping it sustainable, or they're looking to scale up. Those are usually the drivers. Listen, I got to hire new people. Not everybody's going to be born from 1950, 1960,
Yeah.
1970. That cycle's done. It's been cast, and now we're in the 2024. That's just the natural pressures. Do you find that the government agencies are also applying certain pressures? And I understand it from the point of view you can't discriminate based on age, as long as you're over 18, right? But if you're 66, you can't disqualify a person. The person happens to have a certain gender
Yeah.
identity, ethnicity. Yeah, that's forbidden. Do you find that there's any other elements inside legislation that are help shaping how companies are looking at things?
100% and great topic to get into. There's quite a bit going on from the government side of things. Specifically, I can talk to the Canadian government right now where they are putting money back in the machine for work integrated learning for youth. Lots of programs. There's the student work placement program, which I've helped companies get funding from the government to reintroduce money back into the machine so they can hire more students. There's a lot of scholarships and there's a lot of other things going on with upskilling. So even for people like ourselves who maybe want to learn a new skill, there's a lot of money being pumped into the upskilling aspects. You can see a lot happening at government levels in that space. I think the the idea of also upskilling is a huge something to talk about here because it goes alongside of the next generation. And if you upskill in parallel, people will know that we know AI and we know there's stuff happening and we know there's going to be things that are done differently, right? If we get on board with how do we upskill in the roles or do something different, it's another way. And I know the governments are pumping tons and tons of money into that. They're also trying to support schools, post-secondary schools, trade schools, others with different ways to support, whether it's training programs or whatever it might be. Lots of boot camps going on for tech and construction. There's a couple going on, I know, coming up the next few weeks. But yeah, I think that, and I'm glad that they are recognizing it. I think there's always more to be done, but I do think there's a lot happening there from that side.
One thing that interests me twofold. One, do you have PDFs or ebooks or things that if a person needs to look at hiring these people, they should actually have their eyes open a bit without having to make all the errors themselves? And what are your two or three takeaways?
Great question. So there's a lot of tools and resources online for interviewing, for guides, for opportunities to look at different types of approaches to an interview. I have my own list of things that I've created as well to help organizations when I work with them. So there is definitely a lot of resources out there and a lot of opportunities to get smart on how you want to interview and how you want to get upskilled in asking the right questions and figuring it out. There's also a lot happening with different AI tools that are also supporting things like I'm working with a company right now who has taken the job description, and with the job description, you can actually put it into their tool and it will spit out a a 3D bot who will interview you as you prepare for that job interview, which is super helpful. I've gone through it myself, working with this organization right now in Canada. So there's a lot of really interesting opportunities to explore. Sometimes a bit overwhelming, Wayne, to see what's all out there. But if you start to look at some of the technology tools that are coming to the forefront, I think really they're helping us in this interviewing process. There's a lot that are built too, so that there's another one I worked with that it only you can record your voice to questions. So there's no looking at who you are or whatever in those interviews. There's tools that scrub out your name, scrub out your school, other things. There's a lot of different ways to, again, make it an opportunity for talent to get their way into the companies and not be judged or prejudged for who they are.
And Brien, if this resonates with our listeners, how do we get a hold of you?
I'm pretty much everywhere on social. I try to at least spread the joy and share the thoughts. But yes, I am on LinkedIn. Brien Convery at LinkedIn is a great way to get in touch with me there. You can reach out to me there. I also have brienconvery.com, which is my own website for public speaking, thought leadership, and I do use a blog there. And then there's always Emerge Talent, which is now growing as an opportunity for schools, for students, and also for employers to seek out if they need help, and whether that's recruitment outsourcing for youth, thinking through your strategies, whatever it is, I'm open to help you. But thank you for the question, Wayne. Yeah, I'm definitely eager to learn more and keep the conversation going. So thank you so much for having me today. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you to Brien Convery, my co-host Wayne Pratt, and you, the Knack for Business listeners. If you need to understand Gen Z, you want to hire a Gen Z, or you are a Gen Z and you're looking, how do I fit into this box? Gainfully employed, reach out to Brien. He'd be a perfect contact. And if you're in a post-secondary education environment or even high school, reach out to Brien too, because it can save you some heartaches and headaches. I'd like to acknowledge continued support for the following people. Carl Richard from Podcast Solutions Made Simple, a renowned podcast expert. Fred Crouch, who's a Property Wizard podcaster, where I'm a co-host. Johan Strykel from At Hive, a co-working space that is more than just a space. Melanie Weber, my invaluable business partner, and Wayne Pratt from Motivate You Inc., who serves both as a coach and a co-host to these podcasts. To reach us, info at creativeinsight.com. That's info at creativeinsight.com. Our website is creativeinsight.com. Wayne, how can folks reach you, sir?
Best way is my website, motivateyou.ca. That's MOTIVE, the numeral 8, the letter U.ca. And my email is wayne@motivateyou.ca.
If you would like to be a guest on this podcast and share your knowledge, let us know. We would also appreciate your feedback on the content or format. Check the show notes for more details. For these podcasts, we like to acknowledge the support and thanks to the following people: Carl Richards from Podcast Solutions Made Simple, a renowned podcast expert; Fred Crouch, who is the Property Wizard podcaster, where Bernie is a co-host; then Melanie Weber, Bernie's invaluable business partner; and Wayne Pratt from Motivate You Inc., who serves as both a coach and co-host of these podcasts. Disclaimer: please note that the Knack for Business podcast episodes are meant solely for educational and general informational purposes. The information and opinions contained within are not intended to be professional advice on any subject matter. The thoughts, views, and opinions expressed by the participants are their own personal beliefs and do not represent the views of the podcast hosts or any affiliated organizations. It is important to note that this podcast is not a replacement for consulting with certified experts in your area who possess knowledge of your unique situation. The hosts of the podcast, along with any participants or affiliated groups, do not take responsibility for any actions taken or not taken based on the information presented in this episode. It is highly recommended that individuals seek guidance from their own personal advisors in fields such as accounting, law, or other pertinent areas prior to undertaking any actions or making decisions that may impact their financial, legal, or other aspects of life.